Today we would be going through fundamentals of financial markets. It's our third lecture for today, the entire series. So before we move on, as usual, we'll start off with a small recap of the last week lecture. I hope you all can see the slides. If there's any technical issue, please put a comment, message on the chat. Okay. So last week, if you can recall, we studied the different ways of classifying financial markets. So we studied 7 different. The very first one was based on the degree of formalization. So whether a market is formalized, arranged properly, systematically, was the base that we used. And depending on that, we differentiated between formal markets and informal markets. Now, what I wanted to understand here is after our second lecture, we won't be studying further about financial, formal and informal markets. So in the very first lecture, we studied what it was. We studied why investors preferred more formal markets than informal markets. And then we also studied it under classifications. But moving forward, this topic is much, it doesn't get covered as much in the lecture series. So this is basically it where these terms get mentioned. So by studying that, you could, after that you won't hear the term. So basically study it from here and finish it off. Formal and informal market is a very broader classification of financial markets. So basically, when you begin classifying financial market, that's the very first step you take, because money market, capital market, primary, secondary, everything falls under the formal market segment. So once a market is formalized is where you get different types of instruments coming in, different types of traders and counterparties coming in. So that is what covered under the first classification. So yeah, second one what we had was classifying financial market using the maturity or the time period involved. So basically how we classified there was, if an instrument that we trade is shorter term, is less than 1 year, then the market in which such instrument gets traded is called money market. But if an instrument that you're trading in is more than 1 year, it's more than 12 months, then the market in which such instrument gets traded, we are calling it as capital markets. So basically, depending on the tenor, we classify markets into two, money and capital market. Here, one of the very common examples that I used was for money markets, you can always take treasury bills. Capital market, it's easier when you take shares. The comparison makes much more sense, it's more, you can highlight the more differences. Okay. Then the third one what we had was classifying financial markets according to the counterparty, according to the other person that you're trading with. If you're going to trade and the other party that you're trading with is the issuer of that instrument, we call that kind of a market primary market. If you can recall, we do a diagram where we understood if an issuer and an investor are the two parties involved, such a market is called primary market. We had another name for it. The another name was new issuance market. In this market, what he said, this is where financial securities are created. It's the first time the security is issued to the market. But in a secondary market, the counterparty that you're going to trade with is different. The counterparty in a secondary market is another investor. So basically, two investors trading happens at a secondary market. So the other investor could be the very initial investor or a subsequent investor. But point to highlight is it's trading happening between two investors. In a primary market, it's the issuer and the investor who comes about. And I highlighted primary market and secondary market is a classification that's more commonly used in capital markets. So one of the very good examples that you can use is again stock market, where you can use IPOs, initial public offering, as an example to describe primary markets. And then you have secondary markets where the Colombo Stock Exchange, after you issue the shares on a day-to-day basis, transactions happens between the shareholders. Okay. Then we had the fourth one. We had classifying of financial instruments based on the nature of the claim. Nature of the claim the instrument gave us. So if we carried an instrument that gave us the ownership claim, we call that equity instrument, and such an instrument gets traded at equity markets. But if an instrument gave us a credit claim, a debt claim, a claim to demand a repayment, that was a debt instrument traded at a debt market. All right, that was a very easy way of classifying. Very good example that you can use is again shares and debentures. Basically here when you're classifying, if you can list down the differences between equity and debt, you can pretty much cover this classification. But under this classification, if you can remember, we also discussed classifying financial market based on the instruments traded. That's also a part of it, but such a classification gives us several types of markets. You will have treasury bill market, treasury bond market, commercial paper market, share market, corporate bond market, forex. So the type continuously changes. The amount of classifying, amount of types of markets varies. But what you need to know is in such a classification, that particular market, if you take treasury bills, it will only transact or it will only have treasury bill involved. No any other securities gets involved in such a market. Then you have trading procedures. Here what we understood is we classified market based on how the trading platform was designed. Now another point that I needed to highlight for all of you is from point 5, 6 and 7, the classification takes a more complex term. Now we understood last week when we classified, we started from the more conventional base to the more modern and more complex base. So 5, 6 and 7 is one of the new developments that we see, new types of classifications. So these three you need to pay much more attention. Now under trading procedures, if you can recall, we saw the stock market and we saw a bank's website when we were looking at forex. Yes. Now here we had two different types of classifications. We had over-the-counter market and exchange market. If you can recall, the example that we used for over-the-counter market was the foreign exchange market. And for exchange market, we used the very famous Colombo Stock Exchange. Now, over-the-counter market is the key term that you need to remember in that market is that it's not a centralized market. Not a centralized market. Whereas exchange market is a centralized market. So basically, if you can remember the example, think about Colombo Stock Exchange. It's one particular place where all transaction happens. But in a foreign exchange market, you can go to any bank to get your transaction done. So it's not a centralized location. All right. So remember, because most of the students confused when they hear the term over the counter. Remember as this, when you say over the counter, the customer has to have a direct relationship. Think at a counter experience, you have a direct relationship with the cashier. Similar situation in this market, you have a direct relationship with the dealer. Your needs are customized, your request is customized. But whereas in exchange market, it's not as such. It's more standardized. You don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know the end party. You only trade with the exchange. Exchange acts as your counterparty. All right. Then we had a timing of delivery. Again, here, if you can recall, the base we used to classify was whether the delivery of financial instruments occurred immediately or at a future date. If we deliver the financial instrument immediately, if the transaction effected immediately, we call those cash markets. But if a market where the delivery of financial instrument occurred at a future date, we called it derivative market. And one of the examples that we used was options. Options is a very famous derivative and one of the common examples that you can easily understand these types of markets. So option, we studied, you buy the option which gives you the right to buy the underlying asset at a future date. So do you have the underlying asset today? No. but on a future date, you have the right to buy it or sell it. All right. Then we came across origins of market. Here, if you can recall, we classified markets as internal market and external market. External market, we used another term, Euro markets or offshore markets. But under internal market, what was our focus? We focused whether the issuer and the issuance happened in the same country or in a different country. So if the issuer and the issuance occurred in the same market, we call it domestic. So it's pretty much a Japanese company issuing a Japanese instrument in the Japanese market, we call it domestic. But under foreign, what we saw was outsider issuing the country of issuance and the issuer are located in two different places pretty much. It's as if you get into another market and you issue your securities. And one of the examples that we used was samurai bonds. Remember that term very well because it's very fair. It was very catching up. It's a very famous and a common term that was in Sri Lanka and central bank over the last year. So pretty much will get tested. Remember, it's a foreign bond. The term is foreign bond. Samurai is a foreign bond. Why? It's issued by non-Japanese companies, yen denominated, but it gets listed in Japan. Okay. External market, again, our focus here was the currency of the instrument. The currency in which you issue the instrument is different from that particular country's currency. Then it's called a Euro bond. Very example that we used was, think of a British company raising dollar proceeds using a bond, in the French market or maybe in the Japanese market. So Japan, the currency is yen, but you're raising dollar bonds. So that is why you call a Euro bond. So always remember, external market, the focus is on the currency of the instruments and the currency of the country where it gets issued. That's the way of classifying. But in internal market, you're going to see the country of the issuer and the country of the issuance. All right. Fine. So with that, we are going to move to our lecture for today. So today, as I told you, we are going to focus on some fundamental concepts relating to financial market. Now, before we start out the very specific financial markets and the class and the calculations and whatnot, we need to understand some of the theoretical background to it. So now, during this lecture, I'll really prefer if you all can have a note with you to take down notes, because we have a lot of graphs, and when I talk about the graph and when I give about certain insights, I will mention you to take a note of it. So better you all take a paper and a pen and get ready to make notes. I understand you all won't have the physical document with you, but try your best to at least mark the topic and take notes under that. If you have any comments, put me just message on the chat. Nothing so far. I hope you all don't have much doubts. Okay, so we'll start off. So the very first and the common tool that you have when it comes to financial market is interest rate. You can't study about financial markets without interest rate. Now, most commonly what people think is interest rate is only for a debt market. It's not at all related to equity market. It's wrong. Because even in an equity market, interest rate plays a very big role. Why? Because I understand interest rate is not directly involved. Your equity depends on your dividend, your capital gain. But interest rate is going to always be your opportunity cost. What I'm going to say here is, think like this. You have 1,000 rupees. You have an option to put it in a savings account in a bank or go to the stock market. Now imagine savings account, currently it's around 4%, but imagine they give you around 8%. And stock market is so volatile, you don't know whether you will even earn 5%. At that time, you're going to be attracted towards the bank deposit. Okay? But in a situation where the bank interest rates are very low, and very low meaning think about maybe 2, and you know there is a chance in the stock market where if you trade properly you can earn a return more than 2, you're going to take the additional risk and move to the stock market. So interest rate also affects equity market in terms of attraction to the market. All right. So now if you go through this slide, borrowing and lending are both significantly influenced by interest rate. True. Whether you're going to borrow, whether you're going to lend or save. Lending meaning I imply saving as well. That is directly influenced by your interest rate. Now, interest rate is the rate of return paid by a borrower to a lender on the borrowed funds, on the funds that you have borrowed. Or if you can recall under economics, if you had done economics, we studied 4 factors of production. So under that we learn as capital. So interest rate is the price for capital, or it's the cost for capital. Okay. But there are also some books, but there are also another aspect of looking at interest rate is interest rate being your compensation, your return for the risk you take. If the risk you're going to take is less, you will be compensated with a lower interest rate. Okay. If you are going to take a higher risk, you will be compensated with a higher interest rate. Okay. So interest rate is the price of capital, rate of return on the borrowed funds for the lender, the cost of the borrowed funds for the borrower, and it's also the compensation that you get for the risk you bear. Those are 4 different ways that you can look at it. But basically understand what it's a return that you get over the borrowed funds. Okay. Then it's basically expressed as a percentage of borrowed funds. That's commonly known. Next, we move on to significance of interest rate. Why interest rates are important. So let me explain the points here. Interest rate is an important tool in monetary policy through which economic variables such as savings and investments are influenced. So central bank, if you can recall if you're studying the subject economics here, you will know they have a monetary target, and interest rate is one of the tools that they use to influence money market. So interest rate, it's a tool that you use to influence your money supply and your market interest rate and the liquidity in the market. So interest rate, the significance is it's an important tool in communicating or transmitting monetary policy to the economy. Then you have interest rate brings the supply of money or loanable funds. For now, ignore the term loanable funds. I will explain that to you. Into balance with the demand for money or loanable funds. This we're going to discuss in detail. Here what I mean is demand for money and supply of money. The point of intersection is what we arrive at an interest rate. So interest rate basically brings the market demand for money and market supply to equilibrium. This will again study in the upcoming slides. Just make a note of that. Then you have interest rate help to induce savers to direct their savings into productive investments, which in turn promote economic growth. Now here what I'm trying to explain is you understand the word productive investment. Productive investment is an investment that will have future generation of cash flow or economic returns. There are non-productive investments such as buying land, buying gold. So once you buy gold, it's a way of saving, but that investment is not going to yield any economic return. It won't induce economic growth, improve economic activity. You will get a capital gains, but on an economy perspective, economy will not benefit out of it. But if you have an interest rate which attracts savers towards making investments into productive sources, where you bring it to maybe financial intermediaries and then they're out as loans and advances to particular sectors, that will help to boost economic growth. So if you have a very laid back interest rate, this always happens. If you can understand the global scenario, when usually Fed fund rates, US rates drop, usually there's a huge outflow to other markets where interest rates are high, because that's how they can compensate. So when the fund moves to emerging markets, the economic growth happens there. So it's more directed towards productive investments. Okay. Then next we had interest rate influencing individual and corporate financing decisions. This is pretty much easy that you can understand. So even your personal financing need, whether you want to apply for a personal loan or a housing loan, or if it's a company, whether you're going to borrow from a bank, issue a debenture. So that decision, the financing decision influence depends on the interest rate or the cost that you're going to bear out of the borrowing. Then this is an important significance when it comes to interest rate. Interest rates directly affect the value. What I mean by value is price of the security traded in money and capital markets. Now here when I call capital markets, what I'm referring specifically is the debt market. Just make a note of that. It's the debt capital market, what I'm not the equity capital market. It's the debt capital market. So for this, let me explain. So this is the formula to find the price of a bond or a security. Okay. Now you don't have to write this down. Just I'm explaining for you to understand. This we'll study further down. Now here, this is the price of the bond. This is the interest rate in return that you get, maybe something like coupon that you get. And this is the final repayment of the capital. So basically the future cash flows that you're going to get. So the future cash flows are discounted using I. I here refers to interest rate. So think about this. When interest rate increases, mathematically, price of the bond comes down. When the interest rate decreases, price of the bond increases. So I want you to make a note under that, under the significance here. Just make a note saying price of a security or a bond is always inversely related to interest rate. That's always the case. When interest rate increases, price decreases. When interest rate decreases, price increases. This is the formula. We'll study this under capital markets and even under money markets next week. So mathematically, we will show next week as well. Now here when I increases and here also I increases, your numerator is same but the denominator is huge. Because of that, the answer that you get decreases. Just make a note of that here, that price and interest rate are inversely related. Next, we are here to study about nominal and interest rate. Now, we went through the significance of interest rate. Now, we are going to see the very common types of interest rate. Now, if you see advertisements, news articles, the interest rate that they market is always the nominal interest rate. Take maybe Daily Mirror, the very first page, you will see 8% with a huge font. That is the nominal interest rate that you are going to get. That interest rate is not adjusted for inflation, or it's before adjusting for inflation. Okay? Real interest rate is always lesser than nominal interest rate. Now, when I say interest rate is always lesser than nominal interest rate, I am talking in an inflationary environment. But if you take something like Japan where there is deflation, situation is different. Okay? In an inflationary environment, nominal interest rate is always higher than real interest rate. What is real interest rate? It is the interest rate after adjusting for inflation. In other words, if you get 8% over 100, it's 8 rupees. Okay? But with that 8 rupees, what's the actual purchasing power? It's less. So the purchasing power of the interest payment is captured on the real interest rate. So here, underline this, it's the real cost of interest payments. Real interest rate is basically the difference between the nominal and the expected rate of inflation. Now, to understand the relationship between these two concepts, there's a very famous formula. This formula was put forward by Fisher. It's called Fisher's equation. I think you can clearly see it, hopefully. So here, this formula refers to the relationship between nominal and interest rate. Basically, it talks about the relationship between the three concepts: how nominal interest rate is related to real and inflation rate. Okay. So based on this, you might get some calculation. So let's focus on that. I understand I'm not particularly aware of the situation that you all are in, whether you all can actually calculate this. If you all are in the classroom, I would have asked you to. But I have given the answer here in your time, in your leisure time. Please work it out and see whether you understand it. So here, bank provides a loan of rupees 1 million for 1 year, interest rate of 13.3%. If the expected inflation rate over the year is 10%, what is the real interest rate? Sorry, just delete this. Earned by the bank. So we use the Fisher's equation for this. Fisher's equation says 1 plus nominal interest rate equals to 1 plus real interest rate. Multiplication here, please highlight that because so many students think it's a plus. It's multiplication. You multiply it again with 1 plus inflation rate. So there you get a real interest rate of 3%. Now there is also a simpler method, but understand this method always generates an approximation to the Fisher's equation. It sometimes can give you the very exact answer, but usually it's an approximation that you get. So on a simpler term, what you can do is nominal interest rate equals real interest rate plus inflation rate. So there you get a real interest rate of 3.3. It's closer, it's approximated to 3%. Now here what I want you to understand and take a note of is, now this is the Fisher's equation. I understand that. But in terms of an exam, they might jumble this equation. They will give you a similar scenario and ask you to calculate interest rate. Ask you to calculate again nominal rate as this. Ask you to calculate the inflation rate. So have the derivation of each formula with you, have it in your mind, because at the exam, don't waste time deriving the equation from the Fisher's because you might make calculations. It's a very tensed situation, I understand. So here I have given the derivation. If you can, make a note of it. So here when you're calculating nominal interest rate as what we saw in the slide, the formula that you're going to use is 1 plus real interest rate into 1 plus inflation rate minus 1. When you're finding the nominal, okay? If you can make a note of it. So basically there was a plus 1 here. We removed it and we took it to the other side. It's a very easy derivation in terms of nominal interest rate. Next, we had real interest rate. Real interest rate, what we saw was, real interest rate is what we had in our slide here, what we saw. So we saw 1 plus nominal interest rate, 1 plus inflation rate minus 1. So basically this is the formula, the derivation for you to find real interest rate based on Fisher's formula. This is the derivation. Based on the approximation is this. Just take, I'm pretty sure you can see, understand the derivation much easily, but understand how we derive the first one using Fisher's formula. And then on the similar way, you have inflation rate based on Fisher's equation. Here you have 1 plus nominal rate, but here the denominator becomes 1 plus interest rate, and then you minus 1. So similar is on both. When you calculate real and inflation, your numerator is always going to be 1 plus interest rate, but when you calculate real interest rate, denominator is inflation. When you calculate inflation rate, the denominator is real interest rate. Do you all need time to take it down? I hope you all are. Give you maybe 1 more minute. So this is the nominal, very easy. Real interest rate 1 plus nominal interest rate divided by 1 plus inflation rate minus 1. And then you have inflation rate, very similar, but here your denominator changes. Study the formula here itself, so it's easier. If not at the exam, if you're spending time to derive the plus minuses, moving from one side to the other can be confusing. So it's easier to derive ahead and be prepared for the exam. I hope you all have taken it down. Okay. So next we have is some of the basic concepts. This I put in case for you all to get just to get a basic understanding. When you are calculating interest, we use two different ways to calculate. You can calculate using simple interest rate. So in a simple interest rate, your base is always the principal amount, but in a compound interest rate, your base is principal plus accrued interest. Okay, now here compound interest is also called interest on interest. I'm pretty sure you all would have studied this earlier. But remember, in compound interest rate, here what I've mentioned, I want you to read it. The very first interest period, interest calculation is based on simple interest method. Okay, here if you can read, initially interest is calculated you at first using simple interest, the very first interest period. Thereafter, interest is calculated using the accrued value of the deposit, which includes both principal and earlier accrued interest. Now think about this. You put a 1 month FD at a bank, 100 rupees at 10%. 100 rupees when you put the very first month. At the end of the month, you're going to get 10 rupees as interest. So the interest was calculated based on the principal. So it's more or less like just as your simple interest method. But when you move to the second month, your base is going to be 110. It's on 110 that you're going to have the 10% calculated. Okay. Now we move to the more interesting segment of it, how interest rates are determined. Now, if you can recall in the under the significance, I highlighted the second one. Second one I mentioned, interest rate brings the supply of money and demand for money, or supply for loanable funds and demand for loanable funds into a balance. So it's like the price in a demand and supply in economics. If you can recall how price is determined, we had demand and supply determining a price of a product. Just as that, price of borrowed funds or price for capital is determined using demand and supply forces. But there are two different theories that explains how interest rates in economy is determined. The two theories are loanable funds theory and the next is liquidity preference theory. Now in the very first one, loanable funds theory, our focus is going to be on loanable funds. Just underline that term. That's your key term in the theory. The second, liquidity preference theory, your focus is going to be on money balances. That's the key term in this particular theory. Okay. So loanable funds theory. Loanable funds theory was introduced by the Swedish economist called Wicksell. Just have an idea of it in case it pops up in a MCQ. Now you need to understand what loanable funds mean. The definition for the loanable funds term is that it's the sum of money that is supplied to lend and demanded to invest during a given period of time. So when you say supplied to lend, you're going to lend meaning it's credit, and you're going to demand to invest is also talking about credit. You have money to borrow and money to lend. So here what loanable funds theory, the definition highlight the term sum of money supplied to lend and demanded to invest. That is what referred to as loanable funds. Now, as per this theory, equilibrium interest rate is determined by the demand for loanable funds and the supply or loanable funds. Okay, so loanable funds, I explained you earlier, supply to lend meaning when if you are going to lend, who is going to lend? The savers. It's the saver who has the money to lend. Remember in the very first lecture, we had the financial intermediation diagram that we went through. So money for lending purpose comes from this excess units. So that is loanable funds. And again, demand to invest, which comes from the deficit unit, is also referred to under loanable funds. So basically, we can use a common term called credit for you to understand. But under this theory, if you are going to use this theory to write an answer, the key term that you're going to use is loanable funds. So savings is the source for the supply of loanable funds. What is the argument? Who is going to supply to lend? It's the excess unit. So excess units are the savers. So saving comes from the savers. So savings is the source for the supply. And who is going to demand for the loanable funds? The deficit unit. And why do they want to demand? The most common reason is to make investments for their financial needs. So here you say investment as the key source of demand for loanable funds. Now I have elaborated on the demand and supply side because this is one of the, it could be a possible MCQ I feel, or even a writing answer. What you need to understand is demand for loanable funds. Yes, saving is the source, but it can come under, the investment is the source, but it can come under different ways. So a household can demand for loanable funds for consumption. So if you want to buy a car, you're going to demand for money. You're going to, maybe you don't have your funds, you will go to a bank to borrow. So under that, demand for loanable funds coming under household is for their own consumption. But if it's a company, it's mostly investment. For a government, it's in terms of a budget deficit. When they can't meet their revenue and the expenses, the deficit occurs. To bridge that, they need credit. Or when there is a decrease in money stock, when there is low money stock, money balances in the economy. And the other one is when there is increased demand for money. Highlight here demand for money. This involves, this links to the next theory. Okay. Supply of loanable funds, we understood saving is the key source. Saving can come from different angles. If it's a household, their personal savings. Companies, it could be in the form of undistributed profits. Why I explain here as undistributed profit is the word retained earnings can be a bit complicated for some students who don't come from a financial or accounting background. So what I here mean is retained earnings. But in terms of the government, it's the budget surplus. And here you have increase in money stock. When there's a lot of money balances circulating in the economy, you have more supply of loanable funds. When you have not so much of money balances, You demand for more because there's a deficit in the market and you need money. Okay? Then you have decrease in demand for money. When there is a slowdown in the economy for money, again, supply increases. The availability of loanable funds increases. So just remember, these 5 are the different ways the demand and supply for loanable funds could emerge. Okay. Now, demand for loanable funds is downward sloping. Just like demand and supply in economics, demand for loanable funds is downward sloping. Why? Remember, the price that we are talking here is interest rate. So imagine this. Demand for money, demand for loanable funds. Think about, let's think from personal angle, you want to borrow to buy a car. But when you go to a bank, they say interest rate is 20%. It's too costly for you. So higher the interest rate, the amount that you are going to demand is going to be less. Maybe you wanted to buy a 5 million car, but when you went to the bank and they said 20 million, you said, no, I'll take only 1 million from you. I'll find another source. So when interest rate increases, the quantity demanded drops. But when the interest rate is low, the quantity that you demand, the quantity that you want to invest for your personal consumption will be higher. Maybe think of a situation where they give a vehicle loan for maybe 6%, you'll be even willing to buy a 10 million car. Okay. But supply for loanable funds is the opposite. It's upward sloping, meaning it directly moves with the interest rate. If the interest rate is 20%, won't you put a FD? Yes. If they give you 20% for a year, who wouldn't put a fixed deposit? Right? Okay. But if your fixed deposit rate that you get for 1 year is maybe 5%, what happens? Supply for the loanable funds drop. You're not willing to bring in, save. You rather spend. Okay. So high interest attracts savings, which becomes more attractive for them at that time. And therefore, the quantity of the loanable funds available to supply increases. So that's why supply of loanable funds is always upward sloping and demand is always downward sloping. So here you have the diagram. Hope you can see it. Yes. So here demand for loanable funds is downward sloping. So when interest rate increases, quantity drops. Think about this. When interest rate is high, quantity is lesser. But imagine a situation where interest rate is lower, the quantity that you will demand is higher. Similarly, in terms of supply of loans, it's upward sloping. If it's higher, the quantity that you're willing to supply is high. But if the rate is lower, the quantity that you're willing to supply is very less. So at the equilibrium point is where you get R0 being the equilibrium interest rate. So equilibrium interest rate is the rate at which quantity of loanable funds supplied equals the quantity of loanable funds demanded. Now, a point to note is if the equilibrium interest rate or if the market interest rate moves higher than R0, if the interest rate were above R0, imagine a situation of somewhere over here, interest rate is higher than R0. In that situation, what happens? You can understand demand is less. So demand is pretty much here. But supply is very high. So you want to only demand this amount of money. But supply, you have so much of money in the market. So that is an excess supply situation. It's an excess liquidity situation. So what happens is when you have more liquidity, why? Because so many people are coming and putting as deposits, interest rates are high, it's more attractive, but no one is coming to borrow because interest rates are high. At that time, slowly and gradually, market interest rates will come down till the equilibrium point, till it reaches to the R naught. Similarly, think about a situation where interest rate was lower than R naught, somewhere over here. Here you can see, because it's lesser than the equilibrium interest rate, supply is very less, but demand is very high. So many people want to borrow. In that situation, you have excess demand, a deficit, a liquidity deficit in the market. In such a situation, slowly but gradually interest rate will move up to meet the equilibrium till both forces are at balance. So now you can say pretty much, now here what happens is, the current situation you can scenario where interest rate is lower than R naught, because now you can see saving supply of loanable funds have decreased. Why? Because consumption has increased in this situation. So many people they are withdrawing, the withdrawals are high. So there is a liquidity crisis, you can say, or liquidity deficit in the market. So in such a situation, so the interest rate is a way to induce. Now if you can see ADR at the current week, it's continuous 4 weeks, the average weighted trending. So what the markets are trying to induce investment. Market is very subdued now. Economic activity picks, demand actually picks up. It will move to equilibrium where interest rate will up. Okay. Next, you have preference theory. That's the second theory we're going to discuss. So, on preference theory, this theory covered by Keynes. Theory, the keyword as I highlighted, sorry, liquidity preference. I don't know why it's not getting high. Liquidity preference, but what does liquidity preference? It's the willingness, it's to hold financial wealth in terms of money balance rather than long-term bonds or long-term. Why I call it illiquid? More it's long-term. It's very hard to put it into currency, into a more liquid, rather than investing in a long-term illicit. People or the prefer to hold financial money balance. What is money balance? Refers to currency or cash which is available. So in this theory, the focus is on liquidity preference or money balances. Theory of loanable funds, the focus loanable funds, demand for loanable funds, and liquidity demand and supply for money balances. Okay. Liquidity preference theory, interest is determined by the supply and demand for money. That's why, if you can recall, under the significance I have mentioned supply of money, highlighting the liquidity preference theory, supply of loanable funds, highlighting the loanable funds theory. Okay. Now here, okay, we'll come back to this slide. Now here, money supply, you know, under economics, where we study this, controlled by the monetary policy tool band. So our focus under this is going to be on supply as well. The more focus is going to be on demand for money. So we'll start off with this in this diagram. Again, as I explained before, when you talk about the topmost part, we talk about an excess supply situation, a liquidity situation. But when you talk about a situation where R interest rate is lower than R naught, the equilibrium rate, talking about a lower interest and the equilibrium, it's low. And in that situation, what you have is excess demand but low. Again, in X, what happens? Supply so many to lend, but the demand is low anyway. Slowly, but gradually, it will come down to meet the equilibrium interest rate. Very similar to that. There is excess demand. So many people are demanding for borrowing, but much liquidity in the market to lend. What happens is, again, interest will move up to meet the interest rate. Okay. If you have any concerns, I hope you all can hear me. Okay. Thank you, Sihan. Fine. So we move on to the liquidity preference theory. So very first theory what we saw was the theory on loanable loans. Now we talk about liquidity preference theory. So under liquidity preference theory was brought by Keynes. Highlighted terms. So Keynes is the one who introduced this system, this theory. So here the key term is liquidity preference. What do you mean by liquidity preference? Your willingness to hold financial wealth, form of money, loan balance rather than, money balance rather than long-term illiquid assets. So instead of holding long-term bonds, of holding ready cash in your hand. Money balance refers to currency and cash readily available. So here the key term is liquidity preference for money balances. The focus is supply and demand for money. So here we saw money supply is controlled by the monetary policy tools. It's influenced by the central bank. So as per Keynes, one of the very major force in deciding for interest rate would be the demand. So demand for money depends on the motivation of individuals to hold money balance, to hold currency or cash. Okay. So this demand for money, as per this theory, Keynes says to demand for money, there's three different motivations. One is for transaction, one is for precautionary purpose, another is speculative. So transaction motive means you want to hold ready cash, money balances to effect your day-to-day transactions. Precautionary motive refers to you are willing to hold money balances to meet any unforeseen requirements, maybe urgent medical situation or urgent cash flow need. So for that, you're willing to hold money. Speculative motive is where you're willing to hold money for your investment purpose. If a sudden situation arises, attractive market situation arises, you need to have money balance to make use of that situation. That's what's covered under speculative motive. What you need to know is each of these theory depends on another factor. Transaction motive depends on your income. Higher the income, you're willing to hold higher money balances for your day-to-day transactions. Precautionary motive again depends on your level of income. Higher the level of income, you're willing to hold more money for maybe urgent needs. Speculative, on the other hand, depends on the interest rate. Depending on the interest rate movement, you want to make use of the situation. Now remember, we went through the formula where I said price is inversely related to interest rate. So think about this connection. When interest rate increases, I told you price decreases. So when price of a bond decreases, you're willing to buy the bond. Why? The bond is cheaper, price is low. So the attraction to make use of the bond is higher. The demand, the attraction comes higher. But if you're the one who holding the bond, you're not willing to sell it. Why? The price is low. You won't have a capital gains. But if you're someone who wants to buy it, higher interest rate, which results in lower price, will have more attraction for you. But in a situation where interest rates are lower and price of a bond is higher, you're not willing to buy a bond. Why? It's a higher price. Chances of a capital gain if you buy that bond is very minimal. But if you're selling, you're much more prefer to sell at that point. So speculative motive depends on your interest rate. Why? Interest rate will influence the price of the bond. And because of that, whether your attraction to get into the bond or get out of the bond depends on that. So again, under here, equilibrium interest rate is determined by the supply and demand for most liquid asset in the economy, which is money. Okay, here I had a graph, but unfortunately they have not included it. Let me see whether I can just hold on. This graph was not inserted, so this was the graph that I put across for this. So in the liquidity preference theory, the demand and supply situation is this. So you know, money supply is more controlled, is consistent. It's not influenced by interest rate. Why? Money supply depends on the movement by the intention of the central bank. So here it's more stagnated. It doesn't respond to interest rate. It's money demand that is more responsive to interest rate. Okay. So what is the equilibrium rate? Equilibrium rate is where these two forces meet. So understand the equilibrium diagram for a loanable fund theory and liquidity preference theory are different. Under loanable funds theory, this was the market equilibrium situation. Under liquidity preference theory, this is the market situation for a equilibrium. Okay. So then we move on to much of a very critical topic. So I want you to focus from here on. Now here we are going to talk is why different securities have different interest rates. Okay. Now if you can recall, there are some securities with the same term to maturity but have different interest rate. Now think about a treasury bond which is 5 years, but a debenture also with 5 years. Both of them, do they have the very same interest rate? No. We know debenture carries a higher interest rate than treasury bond. So we are going to study why that's the case. So here our focus is why securities with the same terms to maturity will have different interest rate. And what is the theory that's going to explain you that, or the concept? The concept's name is risk structure of interest rates. And again, we had another aspect. We have securities with same risk and liquidity characteristics, but still they have different interest rates. Now, what is your focus there? Here you can same risk and liquidity interest rate. So think about treasury bill. Okay. Maybe we can use treasury bond. That's much more better. Treasury bond, a 2-year bond compared with a 30-year-old bond. A 2-year bond with a 30-year bond. Why is the interest rate different? That's going to be our focus in the second one. Okay. So risk structure of interest rate. When you're studying this, have it in your mind. Here we talk about the same maturity. Maturity is the same. Maturity doesn't differ. This concept will tell you why securities with the very same maturity period will still have different interest rate. And why? What is the reason for different interest rates? The differing liquidity, risk, and information cost. Please highlight that. Risk structure of interest rate will tell you why securities with the same maturity period have different interest rate. And what is the reason? Because the securities will have differing characteristics of risk, liquidity, and information cost. Now for this topic, please make a note. The example that we are going to use is treasury bond 5 years We are going to compare that with the debenture 5 years. Maturity is the same, but interest rates are different. Why? Again, risk and liquidity along with information costs are different for both these security. Now, if you understand, at the beginning of the lecture, I told you interest rate is the compensation that you get for the risk that you bear. Okay. Now, if you get into the market, or if you study the interest rate concepts, you will understand interest rate can be broken into two aspects. One is the base rate or the risk-free interest rate, risk-free rate, and the risk premium. Now, risk-free rate, what we usually use is the treasury bill rate. Okay. And then on top of that, you add a premium every time the security gives you an incremental risk. We are rational investors. So when we get into the market, for each additional incremental risk, we will want to get compensated. That's why we will want risk premium. What is risk premium? It is the incremental risk demanded by the investor or the lender to take into account the incremental risk that the security gives in comparison to a government security. Okay. So now risk premium could arise due to following risk factors. You will want to get compensated because of these factors. Why? There can be credit risk for which you need compensated for. Liquidity risk. You will have maturity risk. These three are the most common risk factors. But under risk structure of interest rate, under this concept, because we assume maturity is the same, maturity risk will not be a matter of concern. Okay. Maturity risk. What is maturity risk? The risk of holding longer term bonds. So here, because the tenor, the maturity is the same, maturity risk is not a factor that we are now going to factoring in into the concept. But what you need to understand is credit risk and liquidity risks are available. Okay. Now think about a treasury bond. A treasury bond does not, it's a government issued security. So in theory, we say it's a default, it's a risk free. Credit default is nil. Credit risk is nil. Okay. So credit risk is zero, we assume. And then in terms of liquidity risk, it's low liquidity risk. Why? It's highly traded. You can trade it as a reverse repo. There's so many primary dealers willing to transact, so liquidity is very high. Because of that, liquidity risk is also low. Okay, so you have a treasury bond of 5 years with low to no credit risk, and then you have low liquidity risk. Now think about a debenture. Debenture, last week we saw some debentures, we saw prospectus, if you can recall, of SoftLogic Capital. It's a listed company. Chances of a default, it can be, we don't know, but there is a possibility. So yes, there is a credit risk possibility. What is liquidity risk? Once you buy the debenture, whether you are able to trade it in the market and recover your money, that comparison to a treasury bond is a bit higher. Liquidity risk is higher because of the low liquidity in the debenture. You might not get out of the debenture as easily as a treasury bond. So the risk perspective is higher in terms of a bond, and liquidity risk is also higher. So those two are the easiest forms that you can differentiate. Now here I have listed out in detail. Default risk is the probability that the borrower will not pay in full the promised interest, principal, or maybe both. Higher the default risk, higher the risk premium, and therefore higher the interest rate. Okay. Liquidity is whether you're able to sell the asset, you can quickly realize the fair value of the asset. If an instrument with a higher liquidity, it's more desirable to investors, so they are willing to accept a lower rate of return. So this is what I'm referring to treasury bond. It's higher liquidity, so more investors are willing to hold. So a low rate of return is all right. But if it's an illiquid or a less liquid asset, you need to compensate the investor with a higher yield, a higher return. So therefore, you will have to pay a higher risk premium. Now, what do I refer in terms of information cost? Information cost is, now think, if it's a government issued treasury bond, you don't ask a lot of questions. It's government issued. If you are living in the country, you know the government actions. You trust that there is no credit risk, and you just buy it. But if it's a private issuer, you need to know why he is issuing. You need to know for what he's using the funds for. So that's why they issue the prospectus. There's so many information requirements that the investor needs to be satisfied for. So because the borrower is not well known, the issue, now think about maybe soft logic, the prospectus that we use. If the company is not well known, the investor will have to spend more cost. It can be time or even monetary in terms of gathering information about the borrower. So that is what you refer as information cost here. Okay, so higher the information cost, you will require a more premium to compensate for interest rate. So that will eventually have a higher interest rate. So this clarifies your answer as to why instruments with same maturity have different interest rates. Why? They will have differing risk characteristics, differing liquidity characteristics, and differing information cost. Some books also talk about taxation. Just make a note of it. Tax could also be an impact affecting it. Okay. Then we move to a very commonly tested topic in your exams, which is called term structure of interest rate. Now, term structure of interest rate answers why an instrument which has the same risk, same liquidity characteristics, still has differing interest rate. Now, I want you to think of an example. Name two securities which will have the very same risk and very same liquidity characteristics. You can't think of two different ones which are very common. No, it's impossible to find two perfectly substitutable instruments in terms of risk and liquidity. So what it refers here is, you're pretty much talking about just one instrument. Talk about maybe treasury bill. Why treasury bills still have different interest rates? Why? The reason is maturity period, differing maturity periods. A treasury bill with a 1 month tenor is different from treasury bill with a 1 year period. A treasury bond with 2 years, the yield that you get is different from treasury bond for 30 years. What I want you to do here is highlight same risk and liquidity characteristics. Highlight this term and make a note. Here they are referring to the same instrument, same security. So example would be treasury bond 2 years versus 30 years. So here the differing characteristic is your maturity. Time to maturity is the length of time until the principal amount borrowed is payable. So it's like the time you have till your repayment occurs is what you call as term to maturity. Now, for you to understand term structure of interest rate, you need to use a graphical representation. And this graphical representation is called yield curve. Yield curve. So yield curve, what happens is, you're going to plot the different interest rates with the different maturity tenors, and then you can understand the concept of term structure of interest rate. What does this concept say? It says why different maturities have different interest rate. So that will give you a yield curve is a graphical representation of the interest rate for a particular type of bond. with the different terms of maturity. So this is the yield curve. I hope you can see it clearly. So here you have the interest rate, and here you have maturity. You have 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and then it moves on. So depending on that, you plot the diagram and then you can see it's upward sloping. Yield curve therefore shows the relationship between interest rate and the maturity. Now remember, throughout this graph, same risk, same default risk, same liquidity risk, information cost is same. So it's the same instrument that we are talking about. Okay. Now yield curve can take different shapes. Now when you plot against your interest rate and the maturity, it can be upward sloping. It's also called as positively sloping. Why the slope is positive? Or it can be downward sloping. Or it can be a flat curve. Or it can be a humped curve. There are 4, humped or a bell-shaped curve. There are 4 common types. Actually, the first 3 are the most common ones. You will have a upward sloping curve, downward, flat, and bell-shaped or humped curve. Here we are going to see what the shape is and what the shape actually means. So under the next 2 slides, we are going to study that. A upward sloping yield curve, what does it show? It shows that when maturity increases, interest rate also increases. So next to the diagram, what I want you to write is, you will write M increases, I also increases. Maturity increases, interest rate also increases. Okay. This is what I mean. And that is why it's a positive yield curve. What does it mean? If you see a normal yield curve or a positive yield curve, it indicates that the investors expect future economic growth and future inflation. Okay, highlight this bit. So they expect future economic growth and future inflation, and therefore high rates. Now you might want to know the link of it. Remember, when economy activity increases, when there is more prospects for growth, interest rate usually picks up. So a higher interest rate indicates more growth, more economic activity. At the same time, a higher interest rate will indicate inflationary situation. So in a positive curve, the expectation is you will expect a future growth or a future inflationary situation. Downward sloping is where when maturity decreases, when maturity declines, interest rate, when maturity increases, interest rate decreases. Okay, just make a notation of it so it's easier for you all to study. So yields decline when maturity increases. Highlight this bit. So here the expectation is, in the future you're expecting economic recession, low inflation. You're not expecting much economic activity, the pretty much opposite of the upward curve. The flat yield curve. Flat yield curve says interest rate is same or equal across all maturity. When maturity increases, interest rate has no change. Okay. So what does this kind of a curve imply? It says investors are unsure about the future economic growth and the inflationary situation. In a bell or hump shaped yield curve, it's a variant of the flat curve. What happens is in the shorter term, in the shorter term, you can see here, just in the shorter term, you will have a temporary increase of yield rates. But in the longer term, it's pretty much the same. The short and the longer term are more or less similar. Just in the immediate term, your interest rates are higher. It's more of a market anomaly situation. Very rarely such a situation occurs. Okay, so now we understood term structure. We understood to depict term structure, you can use yield curve. What is yield curve? You plot interest rate with maturity. It shows the relationship between interest rate and maturity. So if it's upward sloping yield curve, what is the relationship? It's a positive relationship. You expect economic growth and inflation. When it's downward, you expect sluggish economic conditions and a slow inflation. And when it's flat, it's the same interest rate irrespective of the maturity. In a flat, in a humped yield curve, you have a temporary increase in interest rate. Now, this is based on empirical data. Depending on the past situation, US stock market situation, treasury market situations, they have plotted this diagram. Now, on highlight here, these are for treasury securities. So the common security, they have plotted for differing maturity. So here you will have so they had a positive time during 2010. They had a positive yield curve. So if you can recall, this was after the global financial crisis. So there was more expectation of a recovery. This was the time, it's a very flat curve, uncertainty. If you can recall, 2007 period was when the system was heating up. There was more, it was more pressure of a uncertainty situation about the future just before the crisis. And here you will know this is 2000, if you can recall, with the Enron failure and whatnot. So here you will know it was just before the expectation was a recession hitting. So you can see, depending on the economic events, yield curve took different shapes. Okay. Now this is like here you can see a more of a humped or a bell curved situation, but I've told you it's a very rare market anomaly that you will come across. Okay. Now here you have theories of term structure of interest rates. Here what we do is, we are going to use 4 types of theories and understand the shapes of the interest rate of the yield curves. So here what I want you to know is, you will understand the assumption of the theory and you will understand why the theory says the yield curve is positive, yield curve is negative, or the yield curve is flat or humped. Those 2 aspects you need to understand. Okay, so we have 4 different theories. You had the expectations, and liquidity premium, market segmentation, and preferred habitat. Now I know when you just hear the term, it sounds complicated, but it's a very simple theory. We'll understand simply. Okay. Now, expectations theory. Before you get into the theory of this, understand that this entire concept believes on investor expectations. Okay, so the most summarized version of explaining this theory is, if the investor believes that the short-term interest rates will move up, that will affect your long-term interest rate. It purely depends on your expectations in the market. Expectation theory of term structure. Okay, what it highlights is that an interest rate of a long-term security is equal to the average of short-term interest rate expected to occur during the lifetime of the long-term security. Now wait, we'll see the example and understand. Imagine this. if the current interest rate is, if the current interest rate is 5%, okay, and the interest in the investors believe in the near shorter term, you can have on average a 10% interest rate for next 5 years. Then a 5-year bond should be priced at 10%. Okay. If the investors expect the short-term interest rates will be 10% on average over the 5 years, the expectation theory says interest rate on a 5-year bond will be 10% too. Now here understand, short-term interest rate on average over the coming 5 years. The 5 years should be the same as the long-term, the maturity period of the bond, long-term bond as well. If they expect a short-term interest rate on average for the next 5 years to be 10%, the theory says a 5-year bond will have to have the result of that expectation. Okay. So as per this theory, it says there is a strong relationship between the short-term and the long-term interest rate. It says that long-term interest rate doesn't occur in idly. It's not detached from short-term rates. Long-term interest rates are influenced by the short-term rates. This I want you to highlight, because when you study the other three, you will understand there's another theory which believes that the long and short-term rates are completely different. They don't influence each other. So under expectations theory, remember there is a strong relationship between the short-term and the long-term interest rates. Why? Because the interest rate of the long-term security is the average of the short-term interest rate. Okay. Now here one another point I want you to understand is, if you see this example, what this example says is, expectation theory says interest rate of a 5-year bond, okay, is equal to the average of short-term interest rate. So here they expect short-term interest rate for the next coming 5 years to be 10%. Then the interest rate of a long-term security is also 10%. So will you invest in a longer term security or a shorter term security? If your expectation for the short term is also 10% and you're expecting 10% for another 5-year maturity bond as well, it's more or less like perfect substitute. You can either choose a short-term instrument or a long-term instrument. It pretty much gets you the same interest rate. So near this example, make a note. Under expectation theory, it believes that maturities of bonds of all maturities are perfect substitutes. Do you understand? Because if you believe in the next 5 years, the short-term interest rates on average are going to be 10. And a long-term bond, 5-year bond is also going to be at 10. Will you go for a shorter term or a longer term? The interest rate is pretty much same. It's like a perfect substitute. So that is what is explained through expectation theory. Okay. So expectation theory says why the term structure takes the following shapes. Okay. So under the expectation theory, if now think of a situation where yield curve is positive, upward sloping, then the yield curve, what does it say? It says that short-term interest rates are expected to rise in the future. And because of that, long-term interest rates are high. Okay. If the yield curve is downward sloping, what does the expectation theory say? As per the theory, what they assume is then the average future interest rates are expected to be lower than the current short-term rate. Therefore, the future long-term rates are going to be lower. If the yield curve is flat, the expectation theory says the short-term rates are not expected to change. It will be the same on average in the future. If it's a humped yield curve, expectation theory says the expectation is for short-term interest rate on average to increase only in the immediate future. So what you can understand is the shape depends on your expectation on the short term. If you expect short-term interest rate on average to increase in the future, then the long-term interest rates will be also increasing. So then it's a upward sloping curve. If you expect short-term interest rate to be declining on average, the long-term interest rate of a bond will also decline. So then it's a downward sloping yield curve. Okay. So as I said before, this entire theory, the base is expectations. Then you have liquidity premium theory. Now liquidity premium theory is an extension of the expectation theory. Okay. Why I say so is because of this. Now understand what this theory says. This theory says interest rate of a long-term bond is yes equal to the average short-term interest rate expected, but there is also a liquidity premium for holding long-term bonds. Now, if you can recall, I told you to take a note of it. We wrote down that bonds of all maturities are perfect substitutes under expectations theory. Okay, that means there is your indifferent of holding a shorter term bond and a longer term bond. It's perfect substitute. So for an investor to be pushed towards the long term bond, he has to get compensated for something. So that's where a liquidity premium comes in. Get it? Investors tend to prefer shorter term bonds. Why? Because there is low interest rate risk. There is high liquidity in those assets. Okay. So therefore, investors must be given a liquidity premium for them to be motivated to hold long-term bonds. Now here, I have used the flat yield curve. I have used the expectation theory, but a flat yield curve. See, when the yield liquidity premium is added on, it takes an upward sloping curve. This is why I said liquidity premium theory is an extension of the expectations theory. Okay. So in simple, this theory modifies the expectation theory by adding a positive liquidity premium. Now, will liquidity premium be a negative component? No, definitely not. You need to give them an incremental return. So always liquidity premium is positive. So please highlight that. This component of it. More or less this. I don't know why it's not working. Okay. This is a key term. It's a positive liquidity premium that describes the relationship between long and short term interest rate. Okay. Now again here also, because it's an extension of the expectation theory, it will show you that there's a strong relationship between short and a long term. Okay. But it does not tell you that these are perfect substitutes. That assumption is not there. Okay. Another one I need you all to understand and make a note in this diagram is, note here, if you have 5 years to maturity, your liquidity premium is this much. But if you hold a 30-year bond, your liquidity premium is higher. So just make a note here. Liquidity premium increases with maturity. Lower liquidity premium for shorter term, higher liquidity premium for longer term. Why I want you to make notes is, in this subject, just by studying the theory, it's very hard for you to get through. You need to understand these small areas, the different ways that they will test. So using this diagram, we'll make note of it while we go through. Okay. So make a note. Liquidity premium increases with maturity. And another note is low liquid premium for shorter term, high liquid premium for longer term. Now, liquidity premium theory explains the following. What? It says interest rates on bonds of different maturities move together. Yes. Now, if you see this, when a short-term interest rate moves higher, long-term will also move higher. Why? Because if here you get an incremental liquidity premium, here also you need to be compensated for that. So the movement of shorter and longer term interest rate are moving together. Next is, this liquidity premium theory usually explains why yield curves are sloping upwards. But what you need to know is, more than a expectation upward sloping curve, under yield premium, under liquidity premium, the yield curve is more steep. Okay, why? You're going to have an additional boost of positive liquidity premium. When you add that to an already upward sloping yield curve under expectation theory, the long-term interest rate is going to be much higher than the short-term interest rate. Okay. We'll see this diagram with that itself, then you can understand. Now here you can see it's an upward sloping situation. EH is referred to as the expectation hypothesis or the expectation theory. So under expectation theory, if the yield curve is positively sloping, under liquidity premium theory, it's much more steep. Why? This is the liquidity premium added on. Okay. Now here also we saw, if it's a flat curve, yes. If it's a flat curve, once you add liquidity premium, the curve becomes positively sloping as well. So if under expectation theory, already the curve is positive sloping, it's going to be more steep under liquidity preference. Under expectation theory, if the curve is flat, it becomes a more positive sloping theory under liquidity preference theory. Okay. But what happens if it's an inverted yield curve? Inverted yield curve will remain to be an inverted yield curve even under liquidity premium theory. Okay. But understand, the slope decreases. Why? You're adding a positive liquidity premium. Once you add a positive liquidity premium, it's going to be less steeper. I mean, the slope is going to be much more reduced. But again, it's going to be inverted. All right. So here I have put the studies that you can, conclusions that we can draw. Liquidity premium is always positive and grows when the term to maturity increases. That I told you to note it down as well. Yield curve, therefore, implied under liquidity premium theory, is always above the yield curve implied by the expectation theory. Okay? And therefore, generally it's a steeper slope. It's always above the yield curve implied by the expectation theory. Okay? If you have any doubts, just let me know. I hope you all are clear. It's a bit complicated. Okay, and then you have the next two. The next two theories, market segmentation and preferred habitat, are a bit of a different basis when they want to argue on in terms of the theory. Now, market segmentation theory Just like the name suggests, it says the market is different depending on different maturities. Therefore, the interest rate for a particular maturity is decided by the demand and the supply for that particular maturity. Okay. So here market segmentation theory suggests markets for different maturity bonds are completely separate and segmented. Now this is opposing the expectations theory. Okay. As a result, yield curve is determined by the interaction of supply and demand for securities at or near a particular security. Okay, so here you can see the diagram. This yield curve is because now imagine if it's a shorter term, depend in this market, this interest rate is dependent based on the demand and supply in this particular maturity market. Here the equilibrium is dependent on the supply and demand for this particular maturity. Okay, so it's very segmented. So what happens is, in such a segmented theory, interest rate for different maturities are determined independently of one another. This interest rate does not influence the immediate term interest rate. Immediate term also doesn't influence the long term. So these are completely segmented or separated from each other. Okay. The interest rate for short-term maturities is determined by the supply and demand for short-term funds. Long-term interest rates equate the sums that investors wish to lend long-term with the borrowers who are willing to borrow for long-term. So the key assumption under segmentation theory is that the return from holding a bond of maturity has no effect on the demand of a bond for another maturity. Why? Because I told you this market is completely segmented. This interest rate doesn't influence these market forces. Okay. So what does this segmentation theory believes? The return of holding a bond in one maturity doesn't affect the demand for another bond in another maturity bucket. Okay. So it is the opposite of expectation theory, which assumes a strong relationship between long and shorter terms. And it also suggests that investors have strong preference for one maturity and not for another. So here if you believe, they say if an investor is in a shorter term market, he will never move into a longer term market. So as per this theory, your requirement maturity exactly coincides with the maturity of the instrument. Okay. So, this might, it's very rare, but only issue that could happen is if you have a particular holding period in mind, then this theory is more, it's more, what do I say, it's more relatable in that situation. Now imagine this, you are investing, you're saving money for your daughter or son's education in another 18 years. So you will only go to a market which talks about a 18-year maturity bucket. It perfectly coincides. Okay. So that was pretty much it for market segmentation. Yeah, so market segmentation, unlike the earlier theories, doesn't explain why the interest rate move together. It doesn't explain this component. Now what? First one is, it contradicts expectation theory, which says there's a stronger relationship between short and long-term market, and it doesn't talk about, it doesn't explain what we studied on the liquidity premium. Sorry, what was that? That interest rate of the bonds for different maturities move together. This theory doesn't explain that as well. This is because the theory views the market for different bonds of maturities are completely segmented, and therefore increase in one bond doesn't affect the interest rate in another bond. But what does this theory explain? It explains a upward sloping yield curve. But here the way it explains is very, very important. If you can highlight this, because it's very different from what the other theories highlight. The demand for long-term bond is relatively lower for than the shorter term bonds. Therefore, the long term bonds will have low prices. And because it has low prices, it will have high interest rates. And because of that, yield curve is upward sloping. Understand the link here. The demand for long term bonds is very low. When the demand is low, price is also low. When the price is low, we understood price and interest rates are inversely related. Low price meaning it's a higher interest rate. So longer term bonds will have higher interest rate. And that is why compared to shorter term rates, it's much higher. So the yield curve is typically upward sloping. So market segmentation explains upward sloping yield curve. Okay. Next we have preferred habitat theory. Now this is a new addition. Most earlier books will only talk about the three theories, the first three theories that we spoke about. But this is a new addition which links two theories that we studied before. Okay. Now what does it say? Preferred habitat theory is closely related to the liquidity premium and the market segmentation theory. Okay. So what happens here is, the key assumption here is, the theory assumes that the investors have a preference for securities of one maturity over another. So that is known as the preferred habitat. Okay. Therefore, the investors will be willing to buy bonds that do not have the preferred maturity only if you get a higher return. Okay, so under segmentation theory, we understood you have a preference for a maturity, so you will only be in that maturity bucket. But what preferred habitat theory says is, yes, you have a preferred habitat, but for the investor to be motivated to move to another maturity bucket, you will have to give a higher interest rate. As investors are highly likely to prefer the habitat of short-term bonds over long-term bonds, they are willing to hold long-term bonds only if they get higher returns. So this will also explain why yield curve is positively sloping. Just highlight that and mention it. Under preferred habitat theory, once again, it explains why yield curve is upward sloping. Why? Investors prefer to be in the shorter term habitat, shorter term maturity bucket. For them to hold a longer term maturity bucket, you have to motivate them through higher interest rate. Okay. So these yield to the same assumption by the liquidity premium, that with the term premium, yield typically rises with maturity. I like that. It's very, very important. The common grounding between these two theories, liquidity premium and preferred habitat, is because you get a term premium, considering the maturity, you will have a upward sloping yield curve. Okay. Now next week, before we start off the next lecture, we'll go through a summary of this theory. So we'll have a summary on the assumptions. We'll more or less like a table we'll see. So it's easier for you to understand the theories. Okay. So with that, we are closing on finishing on interest rates. Before that, we'll see the uses of a yield curve. Why we need to study a yield curve? Yield curve can be used to assess the general expectations of the borrowers and the lenders. Okay. So on the future interest rate. So if a upward sloping yield curve, I told you when we saw this, it shows expectations. Upward shows economic growth, downward a sluggish economy. It's uncertainty if it's a flat. So that's what I mean here. Significance: a normal upward sloping curve means long-term yields will have a higher yield. A inverted curve will show that short-term interest rate will have a higher yield. So there your preferred maturity to invest will differ. Okay. Investors can use yield curve to identify overpriced and underpriced securities. Now this, make a note of it, they can test in very different angles. This one, if a security's interest rate lies above the yield curve, this indicates that the interest security is underpriced. Now let's get a yield curve. Yeah, something. Okay, we'll take this yield curve. So if the interest rate maybe assume is here, when the interest rate is higher, we studied that the price is lower. Okay, so if this particular security has a higher interest rate, we know that price is lower. Okay, and we know this particular security ideally should have this interest rate. So it should have a lower interest rate. If it needs to have a lower interest rate, that means there is a possibility that price will increase in the future. So you will buy a underpriced bond. Okay. You can identify underpriced security and overpriced securities using the yield curve. If you have an instrument with maybe now here you have 6 months, 6 months maturity. If you get a instrument with a higher interest rate, you know that the price is lower. But as per the yield curve, it shows no, interest rate is low. So the price will definitely increase. So you will have a chance of a gain. So then you will invest in underpriced securities. But if you have a security which is lower than the yield curve, something here, interest rate is lower, but that means price is higher. In that situation, will you buy this security? You know interest rate is going to increase and price will come down. That situation, you won't buy the instrument, or you will wait till this movement happens. But if you are a holder of an overpriced bond, you can quickly get rid of the instrument and get out of with a gain. Okay. So that's what highlighted here. It also helps financial intermediation. How? Financial intermediaries borrow funds by selling short-term deposits and they lend for long-term loans. So if you have a upward sloping yield curve, you know your long-term interest rates are going to be higher, short-term is lower. So then the gap, the spread is higher. So a bank or a financial intermediary can get higher profit. Rate is higher, long-term interest rate is lower. You're going to pay higher on your deposits and you're going to of a loss or a decrease in profit. Then you also have issuers can use yield curve to price their securities. So by looking at their yield curve, they can have a basic understanding on where to price the product, price the security. Okay. So if you can see if you want to issue a debenture, by looking at a 5-year treasury bond yield curve, you will have an expect riding the yield curve. Just know the term, what it refers to as riding the yield curve. What does it mean? Okay, what it means is, if this is the yield curve, all right. So in this situation, what they will use is they will buy a long-term bond than their requirement. Okay, than their desired time horizon. They will buy a longer term bond, wait till the maturity is closer to its end, and then they will get out with a capital gains. Why? Now understand this. You buy the bond when it's nine months, the tenor. Interest rate is 1.5. Okay. when the time to maturity decreases, when you keep holding and now it's only 6 months to mature, interest rates decreases. When interest rate decreases, what happens? Price will increase. So when price increases, you can sell at a higher price than what you bought for. So then you will have capital gains by employing this strategy. That's what it means by riding the yield curve. Okay. I've given you the diagram, so it's easier for you to understand. So it's a movement more to this way when you are more closer to maturity. Okay. So with that, we are done with yield curve. This is another concept which is picking up at the moment called the negative interest rate. If you can see this week, it was a very much talked concept, so I added it here. Can interest rates be negative? Yes. What happens here is usually in a positive interest rate situation, what happens? The borrowers will pay money to the lenders. Now, in a negative market interest rate situation, it's the lender who will pay the borrower for using the funds. It is pretty much the opposite of it. Borrowers usually have to make regular interest payments to their lenders when they borrow money. But in a negative interest rate, the role is reversed. Lenders will have to pay the interest to the borrower for using the funds. It's an unconventional monetary tool that is used to overcome deflationary pressure. Please underline this part, the very last line of it. Okay. Now here what's happening is, because the global markets are stagnated and they want to induce investments, they are even considering to bring down interest rates to negative territory so that investments are more encouraged. Okay, so in theory, negative interest rates can help the economy in following ways. What? It will induce people to borrow. It will make demand increases. Why? Because rather than saving money, you will rather spend it. Why? If you put a savings deposit in the bank, if you put 100 rupee in the bank, you're only going to get maybe 90 rupees back. Okay, because now you're not going to get a positive interest rate, it's a negative interest rate. You're going to pay the bank for holding the money. And it will also have increased improvement levels. Why? Because investment increases and then employment economy will reach closer to full employment. But it also has its costs. What are the downsides? Negative interest rate will penalize the surplus units. It will discourage savings. Okay, and it will also affect intermediaries. Why? They are not going to gain. They can't turn around. They can't have earning out of it, and they will also have a liquidity issue. Worst of all, it will have wealth inequality being boosting out. The borrowers will actually benefit, whereas the lenders are going to be discouraged. And it will also encourage the businesses and household to take on more debt. It might be excessive risk taking as well, and that's the next one. Because you take up more debt, it will be more willing, the companies and the individuals are willing to take any higher risk because they have more money at a cheaper cost. Okay, with this I think it's better if we stop. We have another financial market efficiency as well. It's another bit more. I'll try my best to cover it in another maybe 10 minutes. Let's see. So here I have given you examples. Now the Japan is the most famous one when it comes when we talk about negative interest rate. You can see now closer to this period, the interest rates are lower than 0 over here. Here, and there's another interest rate that is the Euro interbank offered rate. It's between the Euro markets and the Euro banks. Here you can see this is also Turkey taking a turn to the negative territory. So it's better if you can read up on this segment because it's like a current affair, current situation that's going on in the market. Okay. So with that, we're done with interest rate. Then we move on to capital markets, a theory which explains capital market behavior. Capital market, again, we are going to focus on equity market. Here what happens is, we know current market price of a share. Now, earlier what we spoke was interest rate for all debt. We understood it also affects equity market in terms of attraction. Okay, but now we are going to move into equity market, a theory that affects equity market. What is the theory? We are going to talk about stock market efficiency. We understand current market price of a share is equal to the present value of future dividends. Okay. However, when an event occurs that changes the interest rate or the characteristic of the company, the current market price of a share will temporarily diverge from its present value. It will change. Now, this event can be a new announcement, a new product launch, something that encourages the company to grow forward, or it can be a discouraging aspect where they have lost some prominent competitor. No, sorry, they have lost a prominent supplier or lost a prominent customer. So these are the key turning events that will affect the current market price. So here we will talk about the degree in which the price will fluctuate. But I think unfortunately we'll have to uh, curtail the timing because we're a bit late with the technical issue. Anyway, I will include this under the equity market and we'll go through. I hope you all were able to understand clearly on the other subject. I'm very sorry for the technical difficulty that happened. And another message I wanted to give you all was, with this lesson, after this lecture, we are done with 3 lectures. Remember when we saw the syllabus, we understood the first 3 covers more or less like the fundamentals. However, once we are done with it, we are going to move to particular financial markets. So there we will understand calculations specific to certain instruments. So before we move to that, I really want to make sure that you all understood the first 3 lessons. Okay. So what I would do is, I have a sample test question bank. It's maybe for 1 hour that you all can do. I will email it to each one of you all, but I would need your email address. What I would ideally want you to do is, I will share my email address here. Please drop an email to that and I will send you each one the test question. What I want you to do is to answer it and email me back. I will correct individually for all of you and come up with the feedback. So at least if you could even look at the tute and answer, I don't mind, but it's your attempt that I want so that I know that your writing pattern is the correct one. Okay. So with that, we'll stop for today. Next week, we will study about money markets. Drop me your email address to mine that I've mentioned here with your name and maybe your bank mentioned. I will have send out the test bank for you by maybe today to 9 o'clock. Okay. So with that, I'm signing off. Thank you so much for listening. I'm very sorry for the technical issue once again. I hope you all were clear today. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a good day. Bye.